So it's transplant day. We have classically had this conundrum where we want plants to be really easily pullable. Transplanters want to be able to go, get moving, get a rhythm. So we like to be able to kind of reach in and grab a whole set of transplants with one hand, which allows you to keep going. We have some kale plants that are even leggier. You can just reach in and they all just rip out. Pullability is super important to the efficiency of a transplant operation. However, with autoflowers or autoflowering cannabis, we have this conundrum where we really don't want root-bound transplants that are easy to pull. We want to get them in without there being any root binding. And that's because any sort of stress event or root binding with an autoflower decreases yield and just messes with the vigor of the plant. So we're in this constant tension or battle between getting the plants in as early as we can and still having them be a pullable unit that's not so gentle or has enough hardiness to sort of stand up to handling. So we generally shoot to transplant anywhere from between day 10 and 14 on these autoflowering plants, whereas these guys over here have been in trays for generally 25 to 30 days. So it's pretty different. They're living in the trays for twice as much time. Now, it presents some challenges trying to get plants in between 10 and 14 days when they really don't have a developed root system and they're just in general not that hardy. So we use this thing called a plug popper, which is essentially just an epoxied board with some dowels that are placed in the board in exactly the spacing on the holes in the bottom of a tray. So you can just set the tray on top of this plug popper and it makes makes it really easy to pop out these transplants. So now looking at a transplant, I believe these transplants are 13 days old and they've got a decent amount of root. I would say these things are probably 1 or 2 days past what is an ideal stage. So just to give you a sense, they're already starting to kind of bind up or circle at the bottom. Now, not every plant is the same. We've got this really dinky one right here, which I don't even know if it's gonna pull. And that one only has a few little roots sticking out. Now, this is one of the challenges also with plant counts of autoflowers. When we see a germination or emergence percentage on a packet or in a seed lot, this would be included in that. Now, the likelihood that this is gonna make it into the field and not get broken during the hustle and bustle of transplant, I would say at best is 50-50. So we've found that whereas maybe on a vegetable transplant program, we're gonna plant about 25% extra, with an autoflowering program, we wanna plant about 50% extra. And that's just gonna ensure that even though we had a really good germination and emergence, I mean, I'd say this is probably 95%, we're probably still gonna end up with 70 or 80% usable plants. Just looking at some of these ones that are smaller, we've got 1, 2, 3, you know, I see probably 10 right off the bat here. And this is a super uniform lot as it is. Now, some people don't realize how important it actually is to get these plants in the ground at this 10 to 14 day window. Now let me just pause there and say, in a bigger cell tray, you have a little longer. This is a 128 cell tray. Some people are using 72s or 108s, and you probably have, you know, an extra 1 to 4, 1 to 5 days in those trays. You know, some of the commercial nurseries we've partnered with or are friendly with are using a larger cell tray just to give their customers a little bit more flexibility. Now this is, these are plants that have been in a 128, same size tray as this. And they've been in here for, I think, between 22 and 23 days. And we're actually already seeing signs of flowering here. These plants are super easy to pull. They just yank right up. There's a really developed root system in here. We have full binding or wrapping at the bottom. And in general, I would consider this a really nice transplant. However, it's an autoflower. And these autoflowers really want to go in early. So if this was a photoperiod plant, I'd say no problem. The photoperiod plants don't have the same issue with decreasing yields if they get stressed at all. The photoperiod plants are way more resilient in that way. It's just these these auto-flowering plants, which provide so many benefits of, succession planting, early season, late season harvest, just the transplant phase is a lot trickier and requires a lot closer attention to detail. So these things I would say are significantly past. We generally toss plants that look like this. Wouldn't even bother to transplant them, just because they're already triggering, they're already showing flower. They'll produce, but they'll probably produce at maybe half or 2/3 the yield as these ones which will just grow exponentially. And these ones will kind of sit there with some more transplant shock, and just not do nearly as much. So, with that said, we can go out there into the field and check out what it looks like to use our water wheel transplanter and the act of actually getting these fairly delicate 13-day old plants into the ground. So these are all plants that have been transplanted this morning. It's pretty cool today. I would say it's in the low 60s. And our internal SOP is that if it's above 70 degrees for the day, we're starting at the first light transplanting, just to make sure that when plants their roots are exposed to light or any sort of handling, that they're not getting stressed by the heat of the day. It always takes the pressure off quite a bit when you have cloud cover and cool temperatures. So like I said, these were probably put in the ground, I would guess, in the last 2 hours. Elliot, our irrigator, has already laid drip, although they haven't been watered in yet. We'll probably wait to water these in until the field is finished planting, which will happen in the next 2 hours probably. Now, this water wheel transplanter, or really any transplanter that has the capacity to put down water with the transplant, is a real benefit regardless of whether it's cool or hot. It's especially helpful in hot conditions because the transplants are able to sit for longer in the ground without being stressed, depending on how your soil has been worked. If you look here, this is pretty small aggregate size, so there's not lots of air pockets for the transplants to have air pockets that can heat up and burn little roots. So as we dig down into the hole where the transplant is, we see a nice muddy sphere where the transplanter put down a nice little puddle of water. And we see that it's kind of compacted all of the soil around the transplant. So like I was just saying, there's no little pockets of air that can heat up and fry little roots. We want good root to soil contact, especially on transplant day. In a minute, we'll go take a second and look at the actual transplant process. But just to reiterate, this water wheel transplanter can buy you time, and it can and does, if it's used correctly, significantly decrease stress on your plants on transplant day, which, like I talked about when we were over at the greenhouse, is especially important for autoflowers. We've seen whole crops trigger into flower earlier than we'd expect after stressful transplant experiences, whether it be on hot days, too late in the day, without using the water wheel transplanter, getting them too wet on transplant day. There's all sorts of ways that you can mess it up with these autos, and they are sensitive. But at this point, we're just trying to minimize stress as much as we possibly can. In a pinch, if you have the water wheel set on a high flow with water, you can let these things sit, soil conditions depending, for 24 hours without actually watering them in. And if you dig around in between the plants, just 3 inches down, this hasn't been irrigated yet, but I'm seeing moisture 2 to 3 inches down. This is just residual moisture from winter and spring. So we're putting the plant into a puddle of water into soil that already has pretty good moisture in it. These plants specifically, I think could sit for 48 hours without us putting any water on them. However, the ones we planted yesterday, we went ahead and watered them in as you would traditionally water plants in, but we just did basically the least amount of water we could do with making sure there's uniform moisture. So that was about 10 or 15 minutes on the crop. Just a minute ago, we were looking at plants that had been planted in the last 2 hours. These are the plants that were planted yesterday. We put the 10 minutes or 15 minutes of water I described using drip tape that has 6-inch emitter spacing. You can see there's a nice band of water, which is what you want, all the way down the line of plants, all the way down the bed. There are some places where at the surface and the top half or quarter inch, it's not wet at the top. We're not concerned about that at this point because this field is going to take a long time to dry down. The main thing I'm looking for is just that there's a band of water that is pretty uniform all the way down the line of plants, down the bed, to make sure that all of the soil around and in between the plants got uniformly and thoroughly wet. So in the background, we have them transplanting. This unfortunately is not the greatest example of a bed. We have some larger aggregate here, which just happens in certain sections of this field because it's got a higher clay content. But a few things to note is in those tanks there, you can put water. We actually do a transplant mix that has a bunch of different yummy things in it. It's got kelp, it's got a nitrogen product, it's got a root stimulator, it's got what we call a quick compost tea. You can do your own formulas based on your soil type and practices, but it is nice for these autos to really minimize stress and give them a jump. They're basically going into a pre-irrigated hole with a bunch of fertilizer so they can just take off and grow, which is really, as I keep repeating, what we want to see with these autoflowers. With our vegetables, in the past, we haven't put fertilizer in the tanks. We've just done water. You know, with higher value crops or things that are more sensitive, I think it makes sense to preload them with that water. You know, a few other things, we'll go closer and watch what they're actually doing. But a few other things to note is they are moving fairly slow, or just the speed that they need to work to do a good job. It requires moving slower when working with the autoflowers. As we saw at the greenhouse, there's a big difference between those plants that are at day 25 and the plants that are at 13. And if you're trying to rush through it, and grab a handful of plants like I showed you with the kale or with the lettuce, you're just gonna end up breaking 2 of them. So they're just picking out 1 or 2 at a time. They're moving at a speed that allows them to put the plants in the ground in a really good way and not break too much, so that we end up with enough plants to be able to plant the square footage we were planning to do. You know, with those vegetables, once again, you saw me just take my hand and I'd end up with a couple of transplants between each finger, and you can probably go 2 or 3 times as fast. And with photoperiod cannabis, same thing. You can get really nice, well-rooted, well-hardened off plants and move a lot faster. But I just want to emphasize it is important to move slow with these autos and not be tearing those feeder roots at the surface and making sure you're not losing too many plants in the process. So behind me, we've got adjustments here on the actual wheels with the amount of water you can let out. Each one is adjusted ideally exactly the same, but that's controlling the amount of water that enters the wheel and ends up in the hole. We're able to see the hole fill up with water and then drain down in, and any of the rooting part of the plant is getting put directly into the wet hole that has good moisture in it, and those roots aren't going to dry out or get overheated or anything. One issue that we have is, especially in our soil type, is soil clogging the spikes. So you have to either clean it with your hand or use some sort of a cleaner tool. We've talked about trying some different silicone or coatings for these spikes so the soil doesn't stick so much. In other soil types that are sandier, it's not nearly as much of an issue, but unfortunately it's just part of it for us at this point. So here's the transplant rig, transplant day, getting the plants in the ground. Slow and steady. On the front of the transplanter, there's all of the pollinators that help beautify the field and bring in all the beneficials to make it this lovely, vibrant, colorful field of cannabis. We hope you enjoyed this little informational video, and happy planting.